We have focused on the private sector, and we have focused on the government sector. But there's a third sector that we need to focus on, and it's the NGO sector, non-governmental organizations. So we talked about CAME, we talked about the Grameen Bank, we talked about other institutions that would fall into that non-governmental organization or NGO sector. It is private citizens who are trying to do something for society, but they're not doing it for themselves. They see the system not allowing certain people to get an opportunity, and they're saying something needs to be done. So the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, trying to eliminate AIDS and malaria and make sure everyone in the world gets vaccinated, is saying every life in the world matters. And because the country doesn't want to spend the money on that particular poor child because they have nothing, doesn't mean that that child should not have access. Or organizations that establish schools in the slums or wherever. They're saying the system is not working for these individuals, so let us go in there and do something. And I'm what you might have called in the old days a PK, a preacher's kid. Growing up with a sense of mission, that there are people in the world, the standard line/lie is that if you don't eat your food, somebody in the world is going hungry and your food is wasting. It's not so you can send your food to them in a poor part of the world, but you get that guilt of, okay, better eat all my beans and my beets and your broccoli because somebody in the world has nothing to eat, and how come you are treating the food like you are wealthy when you aren't really wealthy? So the NGO sector includes in organizations that would have done charities. And I would say that there are a lot of religious organizations that have viewed it as their mission to go into the world and make sure that people have quality of life. So the Catholic charities, the one video of the nun in India, the school in India, she left Ireland and she went to India and she got a PhD. And then she decided that she wanted to be a principal. She had a PhD in zoology. And then so she could have been a professor at an Indian university or any university anywhere in the world. But she decided that she would be a principal of this school. And prior to her taking over the school, it was a school for richer kids in India. People who could afford to pay the fees to go to Catholic school. My children in Catholic school. And I tell them, the public school is a great education, you know. And they say, but Dad, we don't want to go to public school. I say, well, you know, I'm wasting all this money every semester and you guys are... And they expect to go to private universities. And I'm saying, you can go to Oakland for free. But Dad, we don't want... I'm saying, it's a fine school. So they already have a sense of entitlement. We went to private K through 12 and we went to private universities and... Somebody paid that investment and we now benefit and we will laugh at our dad because he wasted all that money. Anyway, so private education in many systems is a profit-oriented system. At least it needs to pay for itself. It needs to be break-even. Unless somebody is funding it. So what's her name? Sister Moody. When she took over the school, she said, okay, we're going to change the mission of this school. Half of the kids need to be poor kids. Kids who are underserved. Kids who would not have access to this school. We need to make a way for them to get access. And it says she went below the slum. This sounds terrible. Below the slum level to the street level. The people who were sleeping in the streets. She's saying, there are these people, as we walk into the school every day, we see them out there, living on the streets. Or in the slums. And we go into our school and we close the gate and we teach at a high level, in a European style, because I'm sure it's a European style education in India for the people who are moving on. And who have the money. And she, I don't know, she or the order to which she belonged, decided that the mission needed to be changed from educating the daughters of richer families in India who wanted an anglicized or European-style education so they can then move on to the rest of the world when they graduated, or be viewed as being better than, and I hate to say this, but if you ask the Indian faculty in Oakland University who came from India, where they went to school, hardly any of them will say they went to public school. Public school in India means you've got a terrible education. So if you want a decent education, it has to be private. Because the public school system is not viewed as providing a quality education. You don't have to go to Rajasthan, where Neeraj and her family are existing, to know this. The teachers are not well trained. There's high rate of absenteeism by teachers. There is not a good way to measure the productivity of what they're doing. It's like the old Soviet system. You pretend to pay us, we pretend to work. So if you don't reward people appropriately, they put in a half-hearted effort and you get babysitting of children. And if you're saying, well, these are poor kids, then you don't really expect them to amount to much, so you don't really push them, because what's the point? But what she did, whether by her own agency or by the agency of the order to which she belongs, is let's change the mission of the school. I don't know, I should say mission. Let's change the focus of the school so that half of the children in the school will be poor kids, rather than all rich kids. It's a sea change. So when we come back, I will talk about other organizations that do this, that go in, that find an opportunity, find a niche, find a dearth, a lacking, and say we're going to try and fill that need. Because these people need an education too. Will the results be great? I don't know. But at least you're saying everybody needs a chance to get an education. And if the society doesn't value these individuals enough to give them the education, we're going to send money from America or England or some other international development agency so that poor kids in India or Pakistan or Kenya can have at least a half-decent chance at life. So we'll come back in 10 minutes and we'll tell this story. I'll use an education example. I could use others like Doctors Without Borders or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but I'll use an education example since that's the chapter we're in. So 10 minutes. If you've ever applied for help from someone else, like you applied for a scholarship or some kind of funding, and well, you know, there's other people out there who want to do good. The Gates Foundation as an example, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and charities like the Catholic charities that do things, St. Vincent de Paul, etc. They're thinking, how can we serve humanity? Show our love for humanity by not just being self-oriented. And the textbook talks about several examples. They're called non-governmental organizations in the development context, but are also referred to as non-profit, voluntary, independent, civil society, or citizen organizations. The UNDP defines an NGO as any non-profit voluntary citizens group that is organized on a local, national, or international level. Task-oriented, driven by people with a common interest, they perform a variety of services and humanitarian functions, bring citizens' concerns to government, monitor policies, and encourage political participation at the community level. They provide analysis and expertise, serve as early warning mechanisms, and help monitor and implement international agreements. Some are organized around specific issues such as human rights, environment, or health. Doctors Without Borders is an example. Is it MSF? Doctors Without Borders is a French expression. Médecins Sans Frontières or something like that. Anyway, whatever it is, Doctors Without Borders. And so there are many good examples of individuals who would go and do stuff because they believe it's the right thing to do. They're not trying to make money. People who go on mission trips to developing countries to build schools or whatever the case might be. Or to go to teach in the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps would be a good example, but that was government initiated. But you get the idea of where we're headed with this. Whereas governments rely on authority to achieve outcomes, where the private sector relies on profits to provide incentives, civil society actors working through NGOs rely on independent voluntary efforts and influence to promote their values and to further social and economic development. So some of you are very civic minded. You think of how can I give back to society? How can I find somewhere in my life to volunteer to do things? I probably mentioned to you that I have this little band on Thursday nights, little kids, and sometimes I wonder why am I doing this? I could stay home, especially when nobody practices. But I view it as something that needs to be done. And the reason I got it was because people who are better musicians than I didn't want to do it. So I just started substituting, and then became my gig, and I'm not giving it up willingly. Or what I do every Sunday morning, I teach these senior citizens, and they love it, and they love me. So the things that you do because you choose to do them, and there's no personal reward or anything. You just see a need, and you fill the need. If you have the ability, you try to meet the need. So I'm going to hit a few more high notes here. The emergence of civil society actors, such as NGOs, as key players in global affairs is recognized by the Nobel Peace Prizes given to Campaign to Ban Landmines. Doctors Without Borders got the Nobel Prize. The Grameen Bank, we talked about that. And other individuals who established NGOs have also been awarded the Nobel Prize. Wangari Maathai, who launched the Kenyan and now Africa-wide Green Belt movement. Some 3,000 NGOs had consultative status with the United Nations as of 2010. The number of international NGOs grew by 20% in the 90s and grew 20-fold. 20-fold means 2,000%, right? 20 times 100. The potential impact of NGOs is also seen in their wide scope and activities and issues, and their size as measured by number of employees, as well as their large and growing budgets. The textbook then goes into talk about public goods and private goods, and it's a conversation I didn't have with you, so I'm not going to pursue it any further. I'm just going to use an example to try and make the point. I actually asked a guy I know if he would come and talk to the class tonight. He has been all over the world working with an NGO, establishing many different programs. He was in charge of several hundred schools in Africa and several hospitals that the organization was running. So I asked him if he would come and talk about the schools, because we were talking about this Catholic man who changed the mission of the school from educating rich people to have the students needing to be poor. He told me last night that he couldn't make it. So I took this handout and I voiced over it and I uploaded it to Moodle. So if you would watch it for 5 minutes or 6 minutes, however long it is, you get the drift of where it's going. But I'll spend a few minutes talking about it. So after I saw the Catholic lady and her changing the mission of the school, I thought, well, I asked him if there was a document that would explain what they were trying to achieve around the world with their international focus in education. So he wrote a guy in London and told him to respond to me by this morning, and the guy didn't respond, so I said, okay, I'm on my own here. Many NGOs, when they're global, they try to establish a single vision and single mission to make sure they're treating all of the various countries equally, because they're asking people to make donations to these things. Actually, one of the stories that I know, the guy doesn't want to talk about it because it feels like a failure, but there were a group of individuals in Canada who were funding a hospital, and a lot of the money went missing. And apparently some politician person intercepted the money when it was coming in, and the hospital never got the money. And the supplies, the medical supplies, they were sold on the open market. And the people who were donating the money felt terrible because they sent like $1.something million, and the money never got to the hospital. Because some politician decided, okay, yeah, this money needs to be redirected towards something else rather than this hospital in the middle of nowhere. And it was an embarrassment, and the donors have withdrawn their support. Many of the doctors at the hospital in Africa left because they thought that somehow there was not enough accountability, that the monies would be sent, that they would come to Canada and ask people to donate the money is sent, and they never get the money. So there's a sense of frustration. Doctors Without Borders, remember the U.S. military bombed the hospital in Afghanistan, was it? And President Obama had to apologize to Doctors Without Borders because this terrible thing happened. And the military obviously had their story as to why they bombed this place. I didn't follow the story because I said I'm not political, but it's still hard to think, that there should be some safe areas in war zones. And you should not have, okay, well, it had to be some kind of accident, because if somebody did it on purpose, that's a terrible thing. Anyway, so he sent me to this document that told me what the vision of the organization was for these schools. And I actually have an example I want to show to you. I also spent much time last night looking at studies that have asked the question, how have these NGOs done in these developing countries? And a lot of the research says that they not do so well, or the evidence is not clear as that they do very well in terms of the return on investment. But when you're giving to a charity, I don't know if at some level you do want the charity to use the money wisely. So the schools, they say, they want to develop compassionate children of integrity. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. And character with the relevant skills, knowledge, and understanding to achieve their full potential, achieved by developing high-quality, holistic, faith-based, and family-focused education, prioritizing vulnerable and marginalized children. I'm going to point to this right here. The children they worked with are children who are generally abandoned, or children who are severely handicapped, mental problems, or deficient in sight or hearing or something like that. In other words, you find a marginalized niche that the society is not interested in filling because the cost is high. So imagine if in Kenya they say, okay, we can educate a child who is bright and try to get him to college, or we can spend money on a handicapped child who will never get a job. The return on investment is that the child, it makes sense. I hate to say it like that. Let me do the gender thing because at least that's more palatable. Neeraj's mother. What's the point of educating your daughter, she said. So what's the point of educating people who will not amount to superstars? If you spend $1 on the person who has the potential, return on investment will be high. If you spend the money on the handicapped child, you might never see the return. So what is the goal? The goal is to develop compassionate children of integrity and character with the relevant skills. Somebody has to sit down and draft this stuff, and it doesn't have a lot of meaning at that time, but you're basically saying, okay, so this organization has 2,000 schools around the world. They're trying to cast a vision for what they want. And at some point, the charity wants to back off and have the government take over. It's kind of you go in there, kind of how the government helps out in a recession, Keynesian economics. Pay people to dig holes and fill them in. They get dignity from work and from earning a salary. They hire other people to do things for them. They buy stuff and the economy recovers. The government withdraws. The private sector continues. I think I use the analogy of the government jump-starting the economy. AAA coming to help you when your battery is dead. Once you're moving again, AAA goes back to wherever it goes, whoever. So that's the point, that you're looking for a niche, something that the local society does not believe is a good investment, and you choose to invest there because of the dignity. Every life has dignity. Bill Gates, why is he concerned about poor kids in Africa, health issues? Because he says every life has dignity. So I'm going to spend that money in Africa to eradicate malaria and smallpox and HIV, because he does have all that money and he wants history to record him as a generous philanthropist. So it said there are many organizations, and this is just one because the guy had done all this work globally that I asked him to come, and he told me I didn't give him enough time. So he left me on my own. That's okay. He said he will come next semester. I said none of my current students who I love so much will get to hear you. So maybe he's not a good speaker. It's the case of the fox and the grapes, right? Oh, those must be sour because they can't get. Okay. Develop holistic, age-appropriate, quality education by following a comprehensive academic curriculum and teaching relevant skills. A lot of this is flowery talk, and I'm sure every NGO tries to couch its language this way. You probably hire a professional to write the document for you, and then you say, okay, can we meet that goal? And often the case is it's very hard to meet the goal because it's written at such a high level. And sometimes the language is so flowery that you can't measure. For those of you who will go on to be charitable in your life, you know that they talk about goals. When you set goals, that your goals should be SMART. You heard of SMART goals: specific, measurable, attainable, achievable, realistic, and tangible. And sometimes people substitute other things for this. So you check SMART goals. Basically a nice summary. And once I was preaching on this, I put these two together. Specific and measurable, attainable and realistic, and tangible. You need to be able to measure the goal. So if you move it from 10 to 20, you can measure. That's a 100% increase. The goals should be specific. It shouldn't be vague. It should be specific and measurable. Holistic. What does holistic mean? I don't know. Comprehensive academic curriculum. How do you measure success in the academic curriculum? Well, 20% passed last year, 30% passed this year. We do it here. We try to measure learning. We have something called an assurance of learning program that our accreditors told us we have to have. We have to tell the accrediting body, are we sure the students are learning? And we have to set a benchmark. 70% of our students will pass this assessment. And when 70% don't pass, then we have to tell them how we're going to close the loop, what we're going to fix to make sure that 70% meet the standard. Tangible means that you can touch it. as opposed to some flowery goal that does not say very much. Teaching relevant skills. So everything in your mission and vision statement, you should be able to turn it into something you can measure. This way you can then say to your donors, well, here's what we said we're going to do. Here's how we did on that particular goal, as opposed to just flowery language. Right now we are trying to provide a medical unit for Kenya, a mobile medical unit. And I forget how much it's costing, but the need is there. And we figure, well, we are going to raise the funds to buy this medical unit so that they can have better access to health, and the health can come to them rather than coming to the health. Character development, whatever that means. I kind of know what that means because I teach in a character development program on Thursday nights too. For me it's music, but it's also like Boy Scouts, etc. Building character. Provide a safe and secure environment for children. So when you're bringing them off the streets and they don't have a place of safety, you want to make sure that the school is safe, that predators aren't taking advantage of the property and hanging around. You know how they say there's a safe zone around the school and you can't deal drugs around a certain area. So often you take language that would be applied to a rich country and you try to apply it in a developing country, but it doesn't really apply because you don't have the policing to support it. So therefore you say these things, but you can't really do much with it. Schools should be a resource for the community. Number 5 here. So what you're saying is that, well, we build a school, but the school doesn't close at 3 o'clock. The school stays open until 9 o'clock. So people who are outside the school age can come and use the facilities for a different purpose. So adult education. You're saying we're going to work the plant till it burns out, like Oakland. Oakland shuts down like 2 weeks a year. 4 semesters, and we keep turning the crank because the building has to pay for itself, so to speak. So you're saying, how can we establish a program, and the program make the best use of the resources? I'll say there are many buildings that are used for like 3 hours on a Sunday morning, and then they close and they don't do anything in it for the rest of the week. Many churches. So you say, you have a building, work the building, make sure it does things, multi-purpose. Don't do it for one design, and then you can't get much out of it. So it says the school should be a resource for the community, a focal point for lifelong learning, contributing positively to the life of families and the neighborhood in relevant and innovative ways. Of course, you have to measure what you mean by relevant. Define it, and innovative means you sit and think, how can we fix this? Prioritize initiatives. Isolated communities. I say that they go after handicapped people for the most part. Schools for the blind, schools for orphans, schools for severely mentally retarded people. How do you measure what you're doing? It's hard to measure, but you know that you're doing something. It's a starfish on the beach. Okay, I saved that one, I saved this one. You can't save them all, but you keep trying to save as many starfish who wash up in the storm. The presence in isolated communities enables us to remove barriers for the most vulnerable and marginalized. The organization's mission is to the submerged 10% of society, the bottom 10% in general. Around the world, they go after the bottom 10%. We're trying to help that group. So you can see why they would choose that around the world. I like the 4th point here. We can improve the quality and availability of girls' education. So among the vulnerable and marginalized are the girls in Pakistan or India, for whom the system will not provide places in the school. So you're going to build a school next to the government school so that girls can go to that school. We're going to do what we can because there's clearly a dearth. And from our Western perspective, what you guys are doing seems a little unfair. But how do you tell the government and the society that has chosen certain priorities that you want to come in and challenge their priorities? You have to be very, very sensitive. Because the government might not allow you to come. And if they allow you to come and you criticize, they might ask you to leave. So you have to walk a tightrope when you're trying to be an NGO. Vocational education. So sometimes you can do academic. But if the greater need, and this goes back to where we started the course, the return to technical and vocational education might be higher than return to academic education. What did Neeraj's mother say about her son? She said, I educated this boy, there's nothing for him to do. So why educate the girl? So if the system doesn't have the job for the people who are educated, then you say, well, maybe this person should have been directed towards VOTEC. And in the European system, they streamlined you earlier. In America, we say everyone should take the academic track. But in Germany, they put you on the vocational track earlier, and there's a job for you. So you go and you be an auto mechanic and there'll be a job for you. Or you go and you take a CAD course and there's a job for you. And you don't make everyone feel as though if you didn't go to college and get a bachelor's degree that you somehow did the wrong thing. The system has to value these things more equally and not push the academic pattern as the better pattern. Number 9, schools may not always be the most appropriate and effective way to meet the educational needs of the community. So develop informal educational options, homework clubs, study groups, mentoring excluded and hard to educate children, literacy classes. Again, the return on the investment is very, very low. That's the point I want to make. Very low return on investment. Should it be done? The private sector in that country is saying it's not a good return on investment because we're motivated by returns on investment. The government sector is also saying educating a boy versus a girl makes sense to educate the boy because and families in the private realm are saying educate the son versus the daughter. So when there's a vulnerable, marginalized, or neglected group, usually an NGO will step in there and ask, can we help out? But the NGO has to say walk a tightrope because you don't want to annoy the authorities. And the question of accountability comes up, so I think I'm going to stop on that right there to make the point that there are thousands and thousands of these organizations out there. And in a course like this, I've never mentioned them before, apart from the Grameen Bank and CAME as a couple of examples in the financial system, but in the general civic sector, doing the things that society needs to get done. There are many international organizations. I don't want to ignore the fact that there are many local organizations in these countries as well that are trying to do this. But you're more likely, I think, to see an international organization doing it than a local organization because the organization needs funding. You have to have donors who are willing to give money so that the charity or the philanthropic group can do what it needs to get done. Or you have to be a Bill Gates who already has the money. And one of the nice things about one of the interesting things about the Gates Foundation is when Bill decided that he was going to leave Microsoft and make this his life passion, that Warren Buffett gave him more money than Bill put into the foundation. Buffett put more into the Bill Gates Foundation than Bill Gates put in. And he told his children, I'm not leaving anything for you. Donating it to this charity. Well, he left them like $1 million each. But then he gave the rest away. Because you're saying, okay, there are other things that he didn't want his name on the foundation. Not Warren Buffett. But anyway, I'm saying that there are people out there with resources. In these countries, in the poorer countries, there are probably people with money as well. And some of them are trying to get their name in the good books too, for doing things. But I think there's more international NGOs coming into poor countries. And from this perspective, certainly speaking to individuals who are living in this country and who might decide that you want to go and do something elsewhere, thanks to your own passion or maybe a light bulb that I turned on, I doubt I did, but a little more compassion oriented. Okay, where do I put my time? And I'll say that there are many organizations where you can go for 2 weeks or 6 months or a year and do something. If you have that orientation to give back, so to speak. And I think that you learn a lot too in the process. You learn things about yourself. You learn how to live without a lot of luxury in your life. You get an appreciation for life. So, thank you for listening to me talk about that. Let's get back to the course. Okay, so let's make sure that we've covered all the high notes of the education chapter. So last week, we talked about the neoclassical theory of human capital. I graphed it for you, and I will ask you to shorten your work life 3 times, or in 3 places, and tell me the story. So I mentioned this earlier. I said truncating it earlier is called early retirement. Cutting out a piece in the middle is called exiting for family formation reasons. And more likely to be females doing that. Of course, nowadays men do that too. And you can truncate it again by entering later. And I tried to go around that last week because I didn't want to be overly sensitive, but since it's my last week, I guess I can say it too. There are individuals who truncate by doing this. So this is their D and that's their A and F. So call this 32, 36, 62. Tell me what I just did.
They're going to college later than you do.
Going to college later in life. What is the consequence?
Less time.
D later is smaller than D earlier. So what's the bottom line? So the bottom line in terms of policy or suggestion or decision. What would you say about the individual who delayed that decision 10 years? Beyond what you said, what is the implication?
They lost income 22 to 32 in the section D. Like they lost that potential income that they could have done that at 18 instead.
So sometimes you look at the numbers, and the way the UN gives the data, it tells you the number of people in the cohort, and then the numbers are like 108%. When I said it's 108% because there are people who are outside of that cohort age who are accessing that level of education. So if these people were accessing the education, and then people later in life were also accessing tertiary education, you can see how the number will go beyond 100%. Why would the individual delay 10 years? Or X number of years? Yes?
Sometimes people do it to save up money during those years working.
So it's like saving to buy the house rather than getting a mortgage. Why else might the person do that?
They might join the military for a period of time and then
Okay.
serve.
So it's beyond their control. Yes?
They might have started a family earlier than 18 for family.
So for a female, I'm going to assume you're thinking female. So for a female who decided to start the family earlier rather than exit later, and then it would be a great analogy for a female, because if she was going to exit anyway, the exit is early. She exited early, by marrying early and having a family, and then entering the labor market. So that would fit into a nicer paradigm. If you're going to exit, you're going to start the family, you found the person you want to marry, you want to have kids. And get it out of the way, and then educate yourself later, yes.
Are we assuming A represents a period of education?
Foregone. A is the foregone income if you're not working.
Okay.
Why do you go to
we
school?
say that in period before that chunk of A, that their expected return was less than their realized return, so it went back.
So this is actually a work life. We're assuming they took a job, or in the case that Sandra mentioned, an exit. So either they could be working, let's assume it's a male person, and that's traditional gendered world, forgive me. He was working, then he decided, oh, maybe I should go to college. But we said that he may have been doing other things. There might be other handicaps or barriers to going to college at 18 and have to do other things, support the family, stay on the farm. It's a Wonderful Life, the movie, Wonderful Life. You want to go, but you can't go because you have to help with the family business.
Well, from 22 to 32, couldn't he thought, oh, I have this vocational job, maybe I'm going to make some money, but then he realizes he make more money if I just went to college. So the expected return was greater than his realized return, and so he decided to go back and get it.
I see where you're going. Because this is a planning horizon, we have to assume you're changing the paradigm, which is fine. That the individual voluntarily made the choice, okay, I'm going to delay that until that point in time. As you're saying that the wage he expected was not actually realized.
Right.
And therefore, so the economy changed on you. You were an auto mechanic, or you were a CAD person, and that market fell apart.
Right.
And therefore you said, okay, I need to go back to school because there's no job. I'm unemployed now. Yes.
You just said what I was going to say.
Okay. You have a great thought.
Oh, my stuff.
Yeah, good stuff. So when I say modify it 3 times, this is one modification. The exit or the early retirement would be the modifications. And I would like for you to talk about it in a developing country context. And one of the things that I would hope that you say, especially if I tell you to say it, is that in many developing countries, the retirement age is 55. And that may be changing now. I'm sure you can Google this and tell me that I'm wrong. But up until several years ago in India, you took a government job, 55 was retirement age. It wasn't you choosing, it was compulsory retirement. So let's talk that through for a minute. Why would the government kick you out at 55? Well, obviously if they're giving you a good pension, then you figure, I can go do other things, yes.
they're getting less utility from you now than they did when you were younger.
So I talked about the basketball player who stayed too long, or the professor who's jaded and really needs to go.
They're going to make less. They're going to be more up to date with their education, possibly. You're going to get more return out of them over the next 20 years or 30 years.
Yes.
Like new ideas. So either probably I would say like new ideas on like monetary policy or fiscal policy or like economic development. Like they might have new ideas concerning new ways to implement it or something like that.
Okay. I have two more heads.
Going off of what he said with the they're cheaper, it might free up money for you to do actual projects that you want to be able to provide to people, but you can't, because I know like government workers can take up a large chunk of a government's budget in not developing countries. So like, let's say you want to be able to build a hospital, but you don't have the funds to do it. If you let go of the person at 55 and hire somebody at 22 who's willing to work for X amount, unless you do that to 20 people, that year you might be able to provide a hospital for somebody where you couldn't do it before because you were spending that money on salary.
So when it's the policy, it's not you're trying to get a project done, it's just the way you do your business. So they're saying, okay, we need to get rid of you because you're high salary and replace you with a cheaper, cuter,
frees the money,
smarter, okay? New and improved. Especially if you're jaded like this profession. So keep thinking on that. What are you going to say?
I don't know if it's thinking like that. Does it have anything to do with life expectancy in this country?
I like that too. That's great. I have two answers. Go ahead, Alex.
I was going to say 65 is like life expectancy in most of the developing countries.
So then you should make people work to 65 and then they drop dead and you don't have to pay them any pension. Well, think about it. Logically, why pay a pension when you could not pay the pension? An insurance company doesn't want to pay you. They don't want an accident to happen.
Well,
They want to collect the premium. Sorry?
If they drop dead too soon, then you don't have anybody doing that work, and then you might have extreme duress.
Have you heard of high unemployment developing countries?
Yeah, but then you still have to take time to train them, like teach them what to
Well,
do.
they already educate them or send them to America to get educated. I've only touched on half of the topics I could touch on. I mean, you can see that this is like ripe for conversation here. So the question would ask you to modify the profile in 3 ways and tell me what you did and explain it to me. That's one of the test questions. So you kind of know all of the education questions. This and the other profile explain why the benefits are higher because they're coming to America because it's easier to get into Cornell than IIT. I still can't get over that. It's easier to get into an American Ivy League school than into the top Indian institute. There must be a way to fix that. And they have 7 branches of the university. What would you do?
You have 1.4 billion people.
But what's the solution? You have 7 branches of this school.
A whole lot more schools, a whole lot more people.
Put an 8th branch and a 9th branch and a 10th branch and an 11th branch and educate these people who want to get in. Not just the top 2%.
Lose the return on investment because you're going to a prestigious school. So they keep the students out because they want that high return.
But somebody else, I was reading your post, if they're going to leave and come to America, who's getting the return?
I mean, they're going to leave and go to America after they graduate from IIT anyway.
So the school collects the resources. It's an exchange transaction. You pay us right now for the 4 years of schooling. We give you the diploma, and we don't care where you go because we got what we could. Someone told me when I was younger that the reason you can't read a doctor's handwriting is because they're scribbling a note to the pharmacist saying, I got mine out of it and see what you can get out of it. That was that scribble that you could understand. So the IITs are saying, we got what we got. And now we don't care where they go to America. Okay. Spread our name and make us famous. This is a potentially very important topic, and I'll find a way to ask the question. Brain drain. If you're going to educate people at the state's expense and they're going to hightail out of there after they get educated, in your poor country, what can you do?
Give them an incentive to stay.
For example, that's the right answer. For example,
Give you an example.
yeah, incentive.
Better job.
Loan
Right.
forgiveness.
Pay for them to be there.
So when do you forgive the loan?
Been working there for like 5 years or 10 years or something.
And after the X years, they leave. What else? Sorry, Dylan. I didn't write down what you said.
I guess on top of loan forgiveness, you can give them better jobs or opportunities. I mean, if they're the elite and they should have some sort of sense of patriotism or try and fix their country.
Give me an example of a better opportunity.
I mean, opening opportunities, architectural jobs.
They have to get an architectural degree first.
Well, I mean, is that what IIT provides?
Engineering? No, and generically speaking, across developing countries, if there is a brain drain. I'm an example of brain drain. Educated by the Barbados taxpayers and standing here and laughing at the Barbadian taxpayers saying, hey, look at that. Yes?
Try to change the industries that are in your country, so they're creating engineers, but engineering greater demand abroad.
How do you do that? How do you create or attract these new jobs?
There's Indian auto companies, but they're not they're not as successful as American and Japanese auto companies, so it's hard. Not as big example. Or tech companies, they're all in California.
You lure like American or industrialized countries to your country to like operate there instead with like tax incentives and stuff like that.
I love that. That's what happened with the Y2K. No one planned this, by the way. At least, if somebody did, it's a conspiracy that I didn't know. The Y2K problem, that the planes will fall into the sky at midnight as the clocks turned over because the clocks were not programmed to go more than 100 years and to double zero and create problems. So all of these smart software engineers in India were brought into America, and then the U.S. Congress would not give enough H-1B visas to bring in the talent pool, and the companies were begging Congress, please let us get some more Indian engineers to save us from the Y2K problem. Some of the smart Indian guys said, oh, let's send the job there. It'll get done. We have satellite, we have internet, it'll get done. And they can solve the problem from there. The radiologist, Mahindra, in the very first segment. Harvard, Yale trained, and he's there in India reading the CAT scans in America, sending the results back in half an hour to the American hospitals. It can be done. So bring the jobs. I still think that India has not done right like China is doing. And maybe it's because it's more market oriented, but certainly less communist. That it would. India creates more problems for itself because India is still, according to the statistics, the average number of years of schooling in India is still less than 6 years of schooling. Elementary, average education, but people like to do it. So very, very few people are getting the high returns. And how will India solve that problem? And India has not created a manufacturing sector the way China has. And if India were paying attention, India would have thought, how can we move all these people from poverty into middle class? As opposed to how can we create a system, keep a system that allows a few people to escape to America or get to IIT. India put a bottleneck on its economy. So the success stories we hear about are not the reality. The reality is still Mumbai, Calcutta, and other places, Delhi, where lots of people, 700 million rural people, who want to get a better life. And if they come to the city, you're not exactly sure. The Indian government is not ready for that to happen. At least in China, the communist system can say you need to stay in your village, or you need a passport, and I need to read your passport to see, do you have a job? Do you have a right to be in Shanghai or Beijing? If you don't have a job, you don't have a right to be here, you need to go back to your village, yes.
So if their people are coming to opportunities abroad, could
the
they
elite.
attract the elite? Could they attract the mediocre of America to them? I mean, I wouldn't mind getting a job in India if.
But you're not mediocre.
I I guess.
By the way, mediocre is not a bad word. It means average. Most people think mediocre means lower than average, but it actually literally means average. So, if you say, oh, right,
So I'm not mediocre. I'm above average. Thank you.
There's words in my mouth. What else can we say?
My point is, you had an article on your Google page that talked about.
An article? You mean a gazillion articles?
Well, I'm talking about a specific article. And you mentioned it talked about traveling abroad to different countries and taking your talent elsewhere because it's in demand elsewhere. So I remember reading that article. They said that some of the people, the way the culture is, they're afraid to stand up to their managers. Or there's just different cultural things that some countries need. So they gave Americans as an example. If they see a problem, instead of just doing it as the process is in place, they'll address it and say, hey, there's a more efficient way to do this. And so there's a demand for that kind of mentality on top of the education that they have.
Yeah. We'll take a minute and tell you a story. So when I got my PhD, I went back home to make a contribution. And I got all kinds of obstacles. So I was teaching at the university before I got my PhD. And the way the university works, if you don't have a PhD, for 3 years you are in a lower rank. Before you become an assistant professor, after 3 years you can go to that rank and then you'll get on the tenure track. But if you have a PhD, you go directly on that track. I taught for 2 years without the PhD. After I got the PhD, I went back and they said, well, you need to do a 3rd year in this lower rank. And I said, but if a new person had just come in with a PhD, you would have put them in the higher rank. So why do you have to go back to the lower rank? So that's just the way it is. So you're using my 2 years of experience here against me. Because if I hadn't done that, I would get the higher rank. So, just other people who don't want to see you get ahead. Well, this is the rule. Well, it's a terrible rule. Well, if you don't want to follow the rule, go find another job. So I left. And I went to work at the central bank. And they gave me a title that was above my pay grade, so to speak, above my ability level. And everybody else in the bank was envious. But I was the only one who had a PhD. And everybody in the unit hated me. Even the secretaries hated me. They said, because you type your own documents, and if everyone did what you did, you would have no jobs. I said, that's not true. You would get a better job doing higher level things. You would not be. But the secretaries would, I would go to a meeting, and an hour after the meeting, I would send out the minutes from the meeting. Most people would wait a week, and then send out the minutes. Because I handed it to the secretary. The secretary would sit on it for a week, and then before the next meeting, she would, it was generally a female, type it up and hand it to you, and then you circulate it. And I would send it out electronically immediately afterward, or walk around to people's cubicles and put it on their desk. And the secretary said, we hated you. We hated you. They were happy to see me go. And the other staff would not support me. So the way it works, when you join the unit, the first thing they do is ask you to write the economy's report. But since you know nothing, you have to go to all of the other economists and ask them, because they're all monitored in a different sector. Ask them to explain to you what they understand in their contacts, etc. And nobody would support me. So I had to do it all by myself. And then you go to the meeting with your draft and they rip it to shreds. So you don't know what you're doing. I think, okay, well, you guys could have helped me, But because I was viewed as having more education and therefore, and I had a higher salary. In fact, the HR manager said to me, your salary is confidential, but by this evening, everybody in the bank will know. It's confidential, but there's a rumor mill and people ask questions. How much is the new guy earning? So by that evening, he said, everybody will know your salary, but it's officially confidential. They didn't get a lot of support. And then they told me, well, because I had the PhD, I needed to move into the vacancy of manager. And I was 27 years old, and I said, just turned 27. I can't even manage myself. Why would I manage other people who don't even like me? So I knew after 3 months that I would not be able to stay there very long, because the system was just like, okay, you are the new guy and you think you're better than we are. So I was forced back to America. That's the truth. By the lack of support, because people thought that the new guy earning the higher salary thinks he is better than we are, and the university went back to try to put me back in that lower category. So all I'm saying hopefully makes sense. The system is so regimented, it's not the word I'm looking for, bureaucratic. There are rules. And you have to walk this way and then turn this way and then hop this way and then bow down and get under the wire, and then we'll give you kudos. And if you don't do everything right,
Is that a separate point? Lack of
bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is a separate point, yeah. Lots of bureaucracy. And that's why the return to tertiary education is so high. Because the system isn't recognizing that there's this great demand that needs to be satisfied, that people who can't get into IIT will come to Cornell or to another university in America, because the system is not responsive. So Bill Gates said that India's problem is that it has too many socialistic institutions that prevent the market mechanism from working. Many developing countries have that bureaucracy, where seniority trumps youth and vitality and knowledge. So somebody would say, well, I've been here 30 years, so I have the right to that position. You've been here 2 years, so wait your turn. And until the system is more fluid, and they let people compete and hire the best person for the job, you will have that particular situation. And there's not enough monitoring. So they talk about schools that are run by charities or even governments in India, where the teachers have a high truancy rate. It's probably in your textbook. Teachers don't come to work. So the kids learn nothing. And now they're asking the kids to take a picture of the teacher in the morning and the evening, so that the administrators who are far away can actually see that the teacher showed up in the morning and stayed till the evening. Of course, that doesn't prove that they stayed, but the research shows that they actually do stay once they're monitored this way. Esther Duflo, she's like the brightest young economist out there, she has done this study and showed that they had to figure out how to make people come to work. Because if you're not monitored, you're going to shirk. And what kind of education are people getting in these rural areas if the teacher is not there? And they have 90 children and no teacher. And they have Job being the prefect, hopefully hold it down the fort till the teacher comes, but hopefully the teacher's coming that day, otherwise what are the kids going to do? Play? Somebody raise their hand over here.
You described it right. I understand.
What did I say?
Basically, I was confused as why they weren't showing up to work, but it's because they don't have any supervision. But in the video that you posted online, it suggested India video regarding school, I guess, for the teachers that never showed up.
Okay.
It suggested that it was because there was a lack of teachers, not the fact that...
Both are issues. So there's a shortage of teachers, there's a shortage of good quality teachers, and some of the data I passed out last week show the number of teachers, percentage of teachers that are actually trained. So if you go back in history, you can look at America 100 years ago and you will see the developing countries reflected in that regard. Many people didn't go to teachers training college. They became an apprentice teacher. And then they graduated into being a full teacher. At some point, somebody decided it's a smart thing to send people off to college to get an education. Because truth be told, do you need a college degree to teach 7-year-olds? No. Every parent manages without a college degree. Why does the teacher need a college degree? What does the college degree do for the teacher? Well, good and other. Not in the college over here. Everybody gets on Dean's list. The problem with open universities. Anybody in the School of Ed? The provost would School of Education. The provost used to complain that every student in the School of Ed gets mixed Dean's list. I didn't understand how that happens. Go ahead. You said read it out.
Yeah, I guess college forces a sense of discipline, so you get good quality teachers.
Maybe. So I'm going to write down what you just said. And I need other people to jump in here.
Certification.
Who said that? Very good. Explain what you mean. Certification.
You have the sheepskin that proves you went through the system.
You went through the system. Okay. So, why do you need that? What does that give you? So Bill Gates doesn't have a college degree. You all knew that, right? Richest man in the world, almost no college degree. But he had the potential because he was in Harvard University and he dropped out because he was too good for Harvard. The richest man in the world. So the sheepskin is I'm fishing for a word here.
Credibility.
Huh?
Credibility.
Okay, that will work.
Standardization.
I was looking for this word here. A signal. Education as a signal. And that's on the handout I gave you. Education as a signal. It signals to the market that you have jumped through the hoops. Terrible story, but it won't be a long story. The MBA degree. The biggest piece of junk out there. But every school has it. Because it's a cash cow for the school. If you have a business undergraduate degree and you do an MBA, here's what you're going to learn. Nothing. But your salary is going to go up. Signal. I didn't realize that till my first friend who got an MBA, who had a bachelor's in business. He said, I just got my MBA. I learned diddly squat. Because in most, I want to say second-rate schools, the MBA degree and the bachelor's are the same courses. Just warmed over and add a few spices to make it flavorful. Because when Harvard created the MBA degree 100 years ago, they did it because companies asked them, can you take our engineers and our artists and people who are trained in a certain area and put together a package of courses that would train them to be a manager? And the faculty at Harvard said, well, a master's degree is a master of arts or master of science. And this thing is not built on anything. You could come to this from any field. So you can't call it an MA or an MS. So when Harvard created it, they created a brand new name. Master of Business Administration. And after Harvard did this, for the companies that thought we need this education codified and certified by the best institution in America, because we're asking the school to do this, other schools looked at that and said, I'll have what Harvard is having. When Harry met Sally, and every other school created an MBA. And then lesser known schools created a bachelor's in business administration. Now I have nothing against the bachelor's in business administration. But Harvard doesn't have one. And the Ivy League schools do not teach business at the undergraduate level. They don't think it's right to teach business at the undergraduate level. So why are the lesser ranked schools teaching business to 18 to 22-year-olds when the best schools in the country say we are not going to do that? Something for you to ponder over. Because obviously if Harvard had a bachelor's in business administration, it would be popular. Yale had a BBA, it would be popular. The biggest majors at those schools is economics, which is that pent-up demand for business, wishing that there were bachelors in business administration. So economics salaries are, when you look at the averages, high, because all these bright people at the Ivy League schools get an economics major. So they bias the data upward to make economics look really attractive. So you're in good company, I think, if you do it economics. I need somebody else to say something because I'm just running out the clock right now. Half an hour. Talk to me.
You could always listen early. You could always listen early.
I could, but that would be like cheating. How was your day today? Fine. How was your day today?
I guess
So you gotta go down on one knee and drop a place and grab the clock out.
Okay, interesting story that I wanted to share with the rest of the class. We were talking about, yes, we were talking about what it took to get to this country. And so a lot of people share cultural stories. I know we had like one gentleman speak about his Italian heritage, and then Dylan said something about his. My father got here because he married an American woman and then received his citizenship and then filed for divorce after. So that's kind of how he got here. And so I was looking at my father's citizenship here to the country, and I saw marital status divorced, and I'm like, Dad, you were divorced? And then my mom goes, Dad, you were divorced? And then
she called him Dad?
My father's like, yes, I married.
She shouldn't call him Dad.
Right? And then my father was like, yes, I was married to an American woman when I first came here, and after 2 years, you are a certified citizen. And then he's like, after that, the relationship just went south. I filed for divorce, and then I met your mother, and then the rest is history. So I guess that's how he kind of got into the country.
But until the immigration department caught up with that, there were lots of those who could arrange to marry a citizen to get citizenship. You didn't have to meet the person. You didn't have... Same thing?
No, I got another story though. So this was something I saw on Facebook, so it was related to the class. it was like a bank, and they were talking about a guy from India who wanted to take out like a $5,000 short-term loan. And he was a multi-millionaire, and they're wondering why does he want to take out this small loan. So he put his Ferrari, it's like a $700,000 car, as collateral, goes to India for a couple weeks, comes back, pays off the loan, and they're wondering why did you get this loan? You obviously have the money. And basically the interest they charged was only $15. He said, where else can you park your car in New York for $15 and not have it get stolen, you know? And it was Vijay Mallya, that entrepreneur we talked about in the first week or two. It's not real?
It's not a legend. Different people have been listed that, yeah. Basically. Never trust stories you heard that. But yeah, different people have been put in that category, yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if this is true, but I heard that that guy from India, like the really rich one,
Vijay Mallya?
yeah, that he filed for bankruptcy and he was like fleeing the country. Yeah.
Facebook.
It wasn't on Facebook, it was on like
The www.
no.
Your story.
I just had a question.
Back to the course.
Try to ruin the fun. When we were listening to Peter Henry, I had this question. I don't know how he would react to it. So these third world countries are making mistakes and they're inhibiting their own growth using methods obvious to developed countries like us and policymakers. Can and should more developed countries somehow jump in and lead into the right direction? Or do they have a moral obligation to do so? Or are they infringing upon sovereign rights? Instead of taking a reactive approach, why aren't we taking proactive approaches to these crises?
America gets what it wants without having to speak to these countries because America has the biggest voted bloc in these organizations. So you can get the result. You don't have to speak to me. You can have Kyle speak to me. And you sit there looking like, oh, I'm so innocent. Like the gal who started the petition against me. Yes.
On that topic, like there was that video where like JFK said, we need to show them the right path to development, and instead of helping, it actually created like massive food shortages because our development wasn't suited to their economy or to their nation.
Like having studied the UN to a large extent in comparison to the World Bank and the IMF, because the World Bank and the IMF can only impose policies once an underdeveloped nation has to come to them and ask for help. And they don't really operate on a humanities basis. Like a lot of the problem is within the United Nations, within these bodies where, you would expect these developed nations to come through and help these developed countries. One, that they're not willing to because it's going to hurt their own pockets. If the United States had to open up its agricultural markets and actually help less developed nations be able to compete in the international market, it would hurt them and hurt their producers. Two, a lot of the times within the United Nations at least, when you're negotiating these things, then nations bring up all these other policies that they want to impose on these countries on a humanitarian basis that don't match the cultural values of these developed countries. Often because these developed countries have very, very heavy cultural bases within their nations because they are still largely rural. So a lot of it is just the selfishness of developed countries and the lack of understanding that they have towards their cultures and just not being willing to say, okay, well, we're not going to be able to change your culture, but at least we can try to help your businesses.
Well, it's just confusing to me because in Mr. Henry's data, he showed that as emerging markets perform well, we benefit also. I mean, why wouldn't we be...
Trade is good.
Right? I mean, why wouldn't we have their backs? And why would we let crises take place when we could see that there's a bubble going to burst or the Mexican financial crisis, we see that going on? Why can't someone say, hey, let's take a proactive approach here instead of bandaging a wound? Why don't we just not fall to begin with?
A lot of it is politics and like...
Somebody sees it. I mean, Soros basically told Thailand, you cannot keep your dollar pegged to the U.S. dollar.
So what, no one believes them? Or?
Well, Thailand didn't do anything. And he said, okay, I'm going to bet against you. I'm going to show you that you're wrong. And kill the Thai baht. Somebody over there. Yes.
Yeah, well, you had that one video when Russia...
This is fun, by the way.
But Russia have started going to their economic difficulties, and I know that they said they had American advisors over there telling them to go ahead and publish the government bonds and sell that. So you got to kind of think, if we go in there and we're wrong, we're going to look really bad. You know,
And
10
remember,
years from now.
if you have two economists, you have three opinions.
Yeah.
So you end up with this problem of who's right.
Yeah.
In fact, as you listen to Paul Krugman, do you know who Paul Krugman is? Of course you do. He won the Nobel Prize. He was at MIT. Paul Krugman. So I'm going to put his name on the exam. Who is Paul Krugman? He's at Princeton now. He's only like the best economist in America. He writes in the New York Times. And he argued that the MIT gang is better than the Chicago Boys. The Chicago Boys was the name given to the individuals who advised Latin America in the 70s, when they were coming out of the dictatorships into the free market. And he said, oh yeah, MIT is better than Chicago, because Chicago thinks it's the best university in the whole world. And he said, no, MIT is better than it. So the Peter Henrys and the Paul Krugmans and all these famous economists coming out of MIT are saying, we give better advice than the people at Chicago. Our advice is right and theirs is wrong. There's different opinions on how the economy should work. And more right-wing and left-wing or libertarian. So every school has its, not every school, many of these schools are ideologically driven. And Chicago is built in the Milton Friedman libertarian model. And the Fed is bad and free markets are good and the government should not intervene. And that's Chicago thinking. And they taught Latin America how to believe in this. And MIT is more Paul Samuelson. So there was a big debate for many, many years between Samuelson and Friedman. Different sides of the political spectrum. And Samuelson is the lord at MIT, and Friedman was the don at Chicago. And of course, Friedman was yay tall. Stand on a box behind him before the other name looks open. As we be on time. Shouldn't do that. Many of you love Milton Friedman, so I should not badmouth the great man. Then the one Hayek, Commanding Heights. 6 hours of Friedman-type ideology. If you want that. Commanding Heights. You have to watch all 6 hours of Commanding Heights before you die, okay? Promise me you're going to watch all 6 hours. Every 2 minutes, pause and think of a question to ask your students when you're a professor. Somebody else. Migration, we're going to talk about migration.
I was wondering, has there been any studies on the interaction between informal economies and developing countries? Like between Botswana and South Africa's informal economies? Or if that was even possible?
I'm sure there has been. It's a PhD dissertation that's not being read yet. I'm sure it's written. So tell me more specifically, what would you be curious about? What question?
The actual economic output produced by these and how they can, if there was such like a trade agreement like the EU in Africa, the informal economy would provide more or equal output than the actual formal economy would by accessing open borders between them. Like if,
That's a question I don't know the answer to, but the whole Harris-Todaro idea within a country is that there's this informal sector, and people end up selling pencils or apples on the street or minor things because they're trying to make a living because they didn't get a formal sector job. And the perennial question, and many of you asked it, if you go to the urban area and there's no job, why do you stay? You keep hoping for a better life. And I think I said, and once you start to have children, you say, well, you know, it's best for the children. The example I used, one of the examples I used was there are many people with great education driving taxis in New York because they came into America and America did not accept their credential. They didn't land in the right place. Let me go further and say, if you get a PhD from a second-rate school, you will not get a teaching job. So if you want to do a PhD, take the best school that will have you. The best school that will have you. So I had this friend, I won't say anything about her because I don't want to let any secrets out. But she got admitted to MSU with funding and Duke with no funding. I told her to go to Duke. Because Duke is the Harvard of the South. And MSU, God bless them, Michigan, is right below Michigan. And if you graduate from Duke, doors will swing open that will not swing open if you graduate from MSU. So bite the bullet, borrow the money, get through the program, and get that Duke credential. She failed at Duke. It was still good advice. So I sent her to Duke so that she would trip up. I need somebody else to ask me a question. This is like your one chance to talk to a great pretender. I am the great pretender? Oh, yes.
All right, just on a personal level.
Personal to me?
Well, in regards to like the discussion in this class, because we're talking about economic development, why did you choose to cut out the portion on like agriculture? You said earlier you cut out a chapter on agriculture as opposed to cutting out a chapter on like migration or education or something like that, because agriculture is pretty important
in your opinion. Yeah, but it's 2% of American workers are in agriculture. So if I were teaching this course in Africa, I would teach agriculture. It was return on investment. I could teach you these things which you'll never use. So I thought, the environment too. I kept thinking, I used to teach an entire course on the environment. And the enrollment was so low, I said, if you build it and they don't come, then don't build it. So I got rid of that course, and I dropped the chapter from this course, and I kept thinking, I could replace it with something. And they added more international stuff, which makes it look like my international trade class a lot, but it also made my life easier because I don't have to go to each. But the NGO topic, I would like to integrate that into the course because it gets a lot of poli-sci interest. And I think that the NGO sector is important. If you decide you want to do something about development, you're probably going to do it through an NGO. As you say, okay, I'm sitting here in America, I'd like to go and spend 6 months or a year or 2 years or whatever, solving a real problem that I know there's a solution for. And I have the ability and I don't mind making the sacrifice. Then an NGO is the route you're probably going to take. Unless you take a job with a U.S. aid. And I wanted to mention that every developed country has an agency on international development. In the U.S. it's called USAID, Agency for International Development. In the UK, I just made up that name. International Development. It's something International Development. I don't think it's IID. In Canada, it's called the Canadian for Development Organization, CEDO. And every developed country has one of these. And every developed country tries to give a portion of its GDP to development. It's the right thing to do. And sometimes it's a fraction of 1%, sometimes a fraction of 1%, and then the countries say, so what did you do for the developing countries this year? Who does more for the developing countries out of their GDP? So that's a big conversation there. But every developed country that believes that it has a moral obligation is going to have its government fund things in developing countries. So a lot of that in the balance of payments in the current account. Remember I said there's these unilateral transfers, monies that leave the U.S. and go to famine in Africa or Haiti or help out some situation. I just mentioned emergencies, but even beyond emergencies, the Peace Corps, funding development programs, funding lots of projects around the world. So every developed country does have an arm that tries to pay attention. And I think if you're a member of the United Nations, you are also a member of the United Nations sub-organizations like the International Monetary Fund and 100 other organizations there, then you're asked to pass the collection plate, basically, and say, can you tell us what you're going to do to help solve these problems? You could do it through an organization like the World Bank, but that's a revolving fund. You want to know what you want to do independent of that. So it's kind of like if you're in a religious organization and you pay a tithe, then they might collect an offering above the tithe. Okay, so can you give something more? So every country has an agency that tries to pay attention to projects in developing countries so that you look like you're a good global citizen. Okay, I'm going to keep you a couple of minutes, so I want to take 2 more questions. Ask me anything at all in the world. I wouldn't promise to answer, but you can ask me anything. Yes, sir.
When you were at the bank, I looked it up, you had mentioned it in one of your lectures. How long were you there?
2 years.
And you don't think that was something you could get over time? Or?
You mean I can still have the bitter root in my mouth?
Yeah, I mean, and couldn't you work with the people there that kind of went over it all? Or?
Well, I think by the time I left, we all signed a nice card. I still have it. I don't know how much they love me. I don't know if I believe it. But what I did win them over. The secretaries actually adopted me by the time I left. Someone told me a long time ago, when you join an organization, make friends with the secretary.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they know what's going on.
Make friends with the secretary. Don't get on the secretary's bad side. Last question or comment.
Were you a journalist?
How do you know that? Yes, I was. My first job was journalist. My major was sociology and political science. My first major. So I kept thinking, okay, well, and I used to work for a newspaper called The Nation newspaper. And I had a lot of fun there. But journalism pays very, very poorly. Very poorly. And also, you can make up the story. A lot of the journalists would write the same story 3 times and not realize they wrote the same story because they didn't keep track of what they said. And they didn't know how to interpret economic data. So they'd go to a conference where economists are speaking and they write the story and the story is incorrectly written. So I used to be at the editorial department trying to fix these things. And I would still be a journalist now if the salary were better. But here's the rest of the story. In my second year at university, I knew British Systems, a 3-year degree. She said to me, she didn't have a college degree, she said, I can't believe you're wasting your time on sociology and political science. I can't believe you can get a first-class honor degree in economics and you're wasting your life. So I changed my major immediately after she said that. I kept thinking, she must know something I don't know. So I switched my major from sociology and political science to math and economics. Same day. Having no idea what I would do with economics. Still didn't understand economics. At the end of my degree, I kept thinking, so what do I say? I don't understand economics. If it weren't for the math, I would be a total failure. I was good at math. And then I realized when I went to graduate school, my PhD was easier than my undergraduate degree. The PhD in economics is like a math degree. And I already had the math. So the other students were saying, gee, how do you know this? So if you want to do a PhD, make sure you have the math. And Peter talked about that, how he went to England and did a math degree to prepare him for the PhD program. And thankfully, my undergraduate was a double major in economics and mathematics. I'm not going to hold you any longer. I know that you're terribly bored and wondering. But in case I never get to say anything nice to you again, I enjoyed having every one of you in my class. And I hope that you have a great life. And maybe we can do coffee at some point when you have time and I have time. So I'll see you next Wednesday. There's a portion of the exam, the open book portion. Make sure you get to it before you come to class.